as Final Fantasy IV Advance. But when Final Fantasy IV was remade for the DS, the decision was made to change the logo. This saw Cain removed, with the focus instead placed on a new piece of Amino artwork that featured Cecil, Cain, Edge, Rosa, and Rydia. It was an unorthodox approach, and it wasn't replicated outside of Japan. Instead, a new logo was created based on with a font more in line with more recent releases. This saw the blanket solid purple tone removed, with the font now black and a bluey purple gradient added to Cain, and it was very similar for its release as Final Fantasy IV Advance. But when Final Fantasy IV was remade for the DS, the decision was made to change the logo. This saw Cain removed, with the focus instead placed on a new piece of Amino artwork that featured Cecil, Cain, Edge, Rosa, and Rydia. It was an unorthodox approach, and it wasn't replicated outside of Japan. Instead, a new logo was created based on a brand new illustration Amino had made. This returned to the deep purple colour, although it did fade into a light blue, and it placed Gubaev as the central focus, as well, it could be argued that his redemption arc was even stronger than Cain's. For its sequel, The After Years, a more modern logo was adopted. Instead of using a character as its central focus, it featured two important locations that were pivotal to the game's plot and had a strong association with its ending. And you can see from the design that there is a clear allusion to moons. When the game initially launched on iMode devices, the logo was given a blue to purple gradient, as an ode to the originals.
Вот я про это же говорю. Жизнь-то у тебя должна быть своя, счастливая, да, хорошая, да. Ну да, понял это, да. Он про себя и говорил вот это.
Color association, but when the 3D remake released, its logo was changed and the vibrant red was added to the existing gradient. Final Fantasy V built upon the established norm when it was released in 1992 by using a blue font and introducing a gradient on the supporting imagery, which was purple. It was also a bit more progressive, as for the first time the imagery wasn't focused on one of the playable cast or someone who opposed them. Instead, it represented a wind drake. These were an endangered species used by the party to traverse the world, and one wind drake in particular, Hiryu, was pretty important to the story. The logo was also quite different from Final Fantasy IV, as the wind drake also interacted with the writing, wrapping its tail around the A in fantasy. Alongside this logo, artwork was again provided by Shibuya, with Bart and Boko featuring. Final Fantasy V was then re-released on the PlayStation in Japan and on the Game Boy Advance, but although the supporting imagery changed each and every time, the logo remained intact throughout. Final Fantasy VI then burst onto the scene with a vibrant and expressive logo. For the first time, it featured a pure black font, and the use of blue, green or purple was replaced by a
смотри, я хоть
red.
сдохну, от меня хоть какой-то, хоть что-то останется, хоть какая-то вонь, хоть, понимаешь? Да. Тяга противоположная, понял. Да. Да бред уже, блин. Нет, да. Ну ладно. Я так-то не самый плохой специалист, учитывая все, да. Да. Только детек никогда, только ничего не делает, да.
Red gradient that faded into black. It was modelled around Tara Branford, the character who many consider to be the game's main protagonist. It featured her riding the Magitek armour, which interacted with the writing, and this served as a reference to the game's opening scene that saw an enslaved Terra visit Nash alongside Biggs and Wedge in order to obtain an Esper. Unlike the two previous games, the box art saw a return to Amino's artwork, and it was more lavish than ever before. It mirrored the logo, featuring Terra atop her Magitek armour as she stood before Vector. In North America, Final Fantasy VI was rebranded to Final Fantasy III, and it continued the use of the same branding as the previous iteration, stylized gold writing with a sword taking the place of the letter T. This time, however, it deviated from the norm and used a textured background as opposed to solid color, and this tied in with the game's advertising campaign, which featured Mog disposing of numerous enemies. With Final Fantasy now cemented as a staple video game franchise in Japan, and with its branding solidified, the logo of Final Fantasy VII was made a bit more adventurous. Due to its significance, it was decided that instead of featuring a character, as they had done so many times before, the logo would instead be focused around a major plot event, the summoning of Meteor by Sephiroth and the impending doom it represented. Amano did countless concepts of what the Meteor should look like, and this extended to its size, positioning and colour. In the end, they settled on one of the larger variants, and it would be coloured with a green and blue tone to represent both macro energy and the life stream. Extended to its size, now cemented as a staple video game franchise, with the game's platform editing with a sword taking the place of the letter T. This time, however, it deviated from the norm and used a textured background as opposed to solid color, and this tied in with the game's advertising campaign, which featured Mog disposing of numerous enemies. With Final Fantasy now cemented as a staple video game franchise in Japan, and with its branding solidified, the logo of Final Fantasy VII was made a bit more adventurous. Due to its significance, it was decided that instead of featuring a character, as they had done so many times before, the logo would instead be focused around a major plot event, the summoning of Meteor by Sephiroth and the impending doom it represented. Amano did countless concepts of what the Meteor should look like, and cementing of numerous color, and this tied in with the game's advertising campaign, which featured Mog disposing of numerous enemies. With Final Fantasy now cemented as a staple video game franchise in Japan, and with its branding solidified, the logo of Final Fantasy VII was made a bit more adventurous. Due to its significance, it was decided that instead of featuring a character, as they had done so many times before, the logo would instead be focused around a major plot event, the summoning of Meteor by Sephiroth and the impending doom it represented. Amano did countless concepts of what the Meteor should look like, and this extended to its size, positioning and colour. In the end, they settled on one of the larger variants, and it would be coloured with a green and blue tone to represent both macro energy and the life stream. One small detail was also added that did not appear in any of Amano's concepts, a small circle just above Meteor that looks an awful lot like materia, perhaps representing the black materia. As the compilation of Final Fantasy VII expanded, the concept for the logo was also further explored, but the first game to be released deviated from tradition and featured a logo drawn by Tetsuya Nomura. Before Crisis released in 2004, and it featured 2 of the 11 playable characters, Rod and Gun. This was a curious choice, as these 2 characters have no particular importance to the story in relation to the others, but perhaps they were just Nomura's favourites. Advent Children was then the next property to be released, and this featured an evolved version of the original logo. Meteor was repurposed to show Midgar as a shell of its former self, and codes were placed throughout, highlighting the genetic disease, geostigma, and this featured choice for, and it featured 2 of the 11 playable characters, Rod and Gun. This was a curious choice, as these 2 characters have no particular importance to the story in relation to the others, but perhaps they were just Nomura's favourites. Advent Children was then the next property to be released, and this featured an evolved version of the original logo. Meteor was repurposed to show Midgar as a shell of its former self, and codes were placed throughout, highlighting the genetic disease, geostigma, that was plaguing the land. The material was also changed to represent what looks like a flower, perhaps a nod to geostigma's cure. Last Order was then released alongside Advent Children, but it featured a muted logo, and Crisis Core followed a similar artistic direction when it launched in 2007. Dirge of Cerberus, which released between the 2, featured a more ambitious logo, as it was a visual representation of Vincent's gun, the Cerberus. The most recent logo, used for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, was very similar to the original, but it was made 3D and featured a much darker tone, an intentional choice to represent that this game will have a much different vibe than the original. Final Fantasy VIII reverted back to featuring the playable cast, but it upped the ante by featuring 2 characters, Squall Hart and Renala Hartley. It also featured them in a way that would lead players to expect something, that they would have a close relationship, something not immediately clear during their initial interaction.
I need leaders who can run brands, presidents of our brands. The world's moving very fast, and if you're not standing on the shoulders of giants, I promise you, you will be beat by somebody who is. This program we're about to get into is just focused mostly on wealth creation, business, entrepreneurship, investing, social media, branding, marketing, buying companies, getting investors, using social media to raise capital, using social media to go viral, TikTok, Instagram, everything. This is the most cutting edge business stuff in the world. So what are the traits that wealthy people have in common? People who are highly successful, who create wealth, have these traits in above average allocation. See, it's not just the learning curve you're on, it's the learning curve your competitors are on. And they're competing for the same dollar you're trying to earn. So you need an advantage, you need an edge. I buy distressed brands, Radio Shack, I bought Pier 1 Imports, I bought Odell Sporting Goods, Steinmart, and Rejuvenate and e-commerce businesses. Good ones are like, oh, Ty, why are you going to share all this stuff? I'm sharing it because nobody's teaching this stuff right. I can buy brands faster than I can find someone to run me. When you click the link below and you get in the 300 Foundations of Wealth, you're going to get the audio and video course. Then once a month I come on a call with everybody and you can ask me your questions. In addition to that, you're going to see a form, a calendar. Set a time to talk to my team to see if you qualify and if it's a good fit for my 300 mentorship. I want to take 300 people in small group, mentor you, both online, with live calls, but also in person. This is an advanced program. I'm pretty sure it'll be by far the best program I've ever had.
Хотите научиться делать картинки интерьера, которые не отличить от фото? Вот-вот я начну бесплатный онлайн-тренинг 3D для начинающих, как стать визуализатором сырья. Для того, чтобы записаться на него.
As the scenario developed, the team knew a lot of focus would be placed around the moment that Squall realized that he cared for Renoa. This would see them have an endearing moment aboard the Ragnarok, but it wouldn't be until they landed that Squall would realize how much Renoa meant to him. This led to him taking a big risk, freeing Renoa from her shackles at the Sorceress Memorial, and afterwards they embraced. At the request of the development team, Amino used this moment as a point of reference for the logo, and after numerous revisions, he landed on a design that everyone was happy with. It's well known that Final Fantasy IX was developed with the notion of returning the franchise back to its roots. This permeated throughout all aspects of development, affecting ways of working and also the story they wanted to tell. Central to this were crystals. In the earlier days of the franchise, crystals were ingrained in almost every story, with the Warriors of Light undergoing a quest to restore them and save the world. As the franchise evolved, that story mechanic became a bit laboured, but Final Fantasy IX reintroduced crystals in a more subtle manner, and it was the impending death of the Terran crystal that initiated everything that unfolded. It meant the logo had multiple meanings. In one sense, it was a graphical representation of the franchise's return to roots, and in another, it represented the spawning of life, as within the context of Final Fantasy IX's lore, life was born of the crystals. For its arrival on the PlayStation 2, Final Fantasy made bold strides when it came to production. Incredible FMV sequences were created, the soundtrack featured much better samples, and it even featured voice acting. But it also featured one of the largest and most grandiose logos the franchise had ever seen. Often, the focal point of the logo would be an image placed between the words Final and Fantasy, or at least it would be central to the words in general. It would also feature a bit of vertical depth, but it was never wider than the wording, until Final Fantasy X. Even with earlier concepts of the logo, such as this one, which still had Yuna as the focal point, it's clear that it was always planned to be a sizable graphical asset. And for the final vision, we got to see a magical recreation of Yuna's somber sending that took place after Sin's decimation of Kilika. It was impactful, as this scene represented Yuna's strength and the important role someone has played in the world of Spira outside of just attempting to defeat Sin. But after learning the truth, Yuna would have looked back at moments like this with a lot of reflection. The logo for its sequel was a bit more blatant in terms of its application, highlighting the game's three protagonists in the midst of some action, Yuna even doing a dodge roll while firing her gun. It looks pretty cool, but the most interesting aspect of the logo was its colour scheme. This was identical to the original, but the gradient was reversed, something that allowed them to be joined up to create a combined logo with a distinct beginning and an end. The next entry was Final Fantasy XI, and this was a much different experience. With Square keen to broaden their horizons, they decided to take Final Fantasy online, and even though they had limited experience, Final Fantasy XI was a solid entry into the genre. Its logo represented the scale of the experience, and in a unique twist, the graphical asset appeared above the Final Fantasy writing as opposed to intersecting it. The logo itself featured numerous warriors from 5 playable races as they banded together to try and fight back against the Beastmen tribes, and this was fitting as thousands upon thousands of players would fill each server. After many years of Yoshinori Kitase and Hironobu Sakaguchi leading the direction of Final Fantasy XII represented a significant shift as Yasumi Matsuno was appointed as director alongside Hiroyuki Ito. It led to a whole new style of Final Fantasy game being created, and its logo followed suit. Judge Gubaev was the central figure, highlighting how important his role was within the story, and it served as something of a throwback to Final Fantasy IV's logo, where Kain featured due to his redemption arc. The specific pose was a reference to his fight in the Sky Fortress Bahamut, which would end up being pivotal to Gubaev's character progression. Due to the judge's due to his redemption arc, the specific pose was a reference to his fight in the Sky Fortress Bahamut, which would end up being pivotal to Gubaev's character progression. Due to the judge's imposing armor and physique, it made the logo of Final Fantasy XII quite striking. Amino made it even more so by having it so tall in comparison to everything else we'd seen before, but what's interesting is that it wasn't even the planned logo. Amino was waiting to submit numerous concepts, but while he was waiting for the representative from Square Enix to come and pick up his drafts, he drew another piece in just under an hour. It was this logo that ended up being chosen, and the team even decided to keep in Amino's spontaneous brushstroke. The theme of much larger logos continued with Final Fantasy XIII, but unlike many prior games, it housed very intricate plot details and even influenced the game as opposed to being designed around an existing concept. Acting as a bold reference to the game's finale, the logo featured Cocoon, Fang, Vanille, and the legendary Pulse of the Sea, Ragnarok, that they transformed into in order to create Crystal Pillar and save Cocoon. But instead of featuring the Crystal Pillar, the logo instead turned into Sarah's pendant, a reference to her overarching importance. It made the logo quite striking, but what's interesting is that the design Amino came up with then influenced the game's ending, as the designers recreated Amino's artwork within the FMV sequence as opposed to it happening the other way around.
Do you know your exact life purpose? You know your destiny? I'm going to show you 3 ways you can figure it out. I wasn't born in Beverly Hills. I was born in the not so good side of town, but and not too long ago I was sleeping on a couch in a mobile home, $47 in my bank account. What I'm going to show you 3 things today, what my mentors taught me, which helped me. It's a lot cooler life I have now. This is a 56-door house, got I think 18 bedrooms, 18 bathrooms, 16 bedrooms. When I was sleeping on that couch with no money, I felt lost and I felt hopeless, and the modern school system doesn't help you out. Our education system is in chaos. You go through it, you don't understand your strengths, you don't understand your weaknesses. People spend 40 years doing the wrong thing. You don't ever want that to be you. Build your life around your strengths, but that means you have to know yourself. And I'm going to give you some tests you can do. I'm going to put a link. I traveled to 50 countries finding mentors, multimillionaires. I read thousands of books. This is the movie theater. It's got 12 seats, got a little basketball on, poker room, pool. Got the jacuzzi here, cabanas, and the main house. We were in the guest house there. So as you're watching this, ask yourself this question. How much clarity do you feel you have? Do you feel like you could be doing more, but you're a little lost? You don't know the steps? I did not know them. I came through the education system. I was born, my mom was a single mom. And I had to learn this the hard way, and I'll show you these things. I'm going to put a link. It's either somewhere above or below. You click it, it takes you to my website. I recorded a quick and easy but more in-depth video. I don't want this one to be too long. I know you're busy, but if you click this link, it'll take you. It's just an amateur video, but I lay out with a whiteboard the exact formula, the exact secrets my mentors taught me. So what you got to find, you got to find mentors. My favorite thing is basketball. Tennis, basketball. Can play 24/7 here. And, if you're trying to figure out what to do, maybe you have a job that you like, or maybe you feel stuck. I read that 85% of people don't like their career. And that all comes back to this question of what is your destiny? This is the gym. Make sure you stay in shape.
Found that to be important. All the money in the world, all the success in the world doesn't matter if you're not healthy. Got the garage here. If you like fast cars, got a few fast cars in here. Lamborghini, Ferrari, Maserati. But my books, I love books. So I'll take you over here to the living room where I shot this video. So there should be a link. Go ahead and click it. Take you over to my website. It'll show you the exact step-by-step formula that you can use, the secrets to figuring out what you should do with your life. Like I said, you might already be successful, but you know you could be more successful. Got a pond here in the living room. Got some pet fish. This I call the Scarface view up here. For those of you who seen Scarface, say hello to my little friend. It's another cool thing in this house. You got this is the board I'll be laying out when you click the link. It's going to take you here and I write this out for you. We got cool front door. Find your life purpose, whatever you do. Don't stay lost. Got a little door and a big door. This door weighs like 600 pounds. Anyway, click the link. I'll see you in a second over on my website, and I'm going to lay out right here 3 things. Click the link, and I'll see you over there in a second.
С каким товаром выйти на Валберс в 2021 году? Сколько этого товара необходимо? Какие нужны документы? Как не допустить ключевых ошибок и какой нужен бюджет? Все эти вопросы мы разберем на моем бесплатном вебинаре. Чтобы принять участие, жми синюю кнопку «Участвую» и увидимся на вебинаре. Меня зовут Марина Полетаева. Я вышла на первый миллион на Валберс с нуля за 6 месяцев. Этот результат уже повторили многие мои ученики. Поэтому жми синюю кнопку и увидимся на вебинаре.
For its sequel, it was decided that Lightning should be shown squaring off against her fated rival, Caius Ballard, the first time a protagonist and antagonist had featured in the logo. The colours were also intentional, as they mirrored the in-game representations of Caius, who was associated with the colour purple, and Lightning and Sarah, who were represented by the colour pink. Lightning Returns then rewrote the rulebook, ditching the traditional Final Fantasy font and the typical grading colouring by having a more modern-looking logo. Guitarte noted that he felt it was necessary, as they wanted people to appreciate the newness of Lightning Returns compared to everything that had come before. As with the previous MMO, the logo of Final Fantasy XIV was designed to represent a much larger group of characters coming together. It again featured the numerous races that players could play as, and they were positioned in a circular formation to show that they needed to rely on each other for support. There were also 14 characters, referencing the game's position in the main numbered series. For the game's relaunch as A Realm Reborn, the logo remained much the same, but its colour scheme was adjusted to crystalline blue, a reference to it being reborn. This also helps to place a focus on the new subtitle and the appearance of Meteor within the text. Now, it's pretty common knowledge that Final Fantasy XV had a rather tumultuous development cycle, and this led to some interesting changes to its logo. When it was first unveiled as Final Fantasy Versus 13, its logo was designed to have contrasting colours to that of Final Fantasy XIII, as they were meant to be in the same shared mythology. It featured a sleeping woman, most likely Etro, with a blue orb behind her, and it also featured a shut eye as a nod to the song Somnus. After its rebrand to Final Fantasy XV, the graphical asset was retained, but it was given an even darker tone. The blue orb lost its colour, and the sleeping woman was changed to be the Oracle, Luna Freya Nox Fleuret. Upon completing the game, the player would then see the game's true logo revealed. This featured a sleeping Noctis in his royal attire to tie in with the game's ending. And that brings us on to Final Fantasy XVI, the next major installment. At the moment we don't know, well, anything much about the story, but we can assume that Phoenix and Ifrit, both icons associated with the Fire Crystal, will be central to the plot. As such, they both appear in the game's logo, with Phoenix adopting a fiery colour and Ifrit adopting a much darker one, suggesting that it's a nefarious party. And with that, I think we're done. We've covered a lot of logos throughout this video, and we hope you found the explanations very insightful. Let us know in the comments below which logo has been your favourite, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. I'd also like to thank again Abbasdet for the recommendation to create the video. If you'd like to have a video created in a similar manner, feel free to head over to Patreon to find out more. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. A big thanks to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, and of course a big thanks to all of you for watching this video. I hope to see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.
Я больше не в силах ждать.
Всего месяц. И я смогу угостить тебя кофе. Только не уходи к другому. Теряете время и клиентов на открытие счета? Откройте счет для бизнеса в Райффайзенбанке прямо в день заявки. Один день и никаких драм.
Детство, да.
Let's talk about you right now. Maybe life's tough right now. Financial pressure is building up on you. You know, anxiety, depression. Is there a way to fix it, or are you stuck? And that's a question I had to ask myself. You know, people see me now, they see on social media, and they're like, this guy doesn't get it, he doesn't understand what it's like. It's not true. Not true. I was not born to rich parents. In fact, I was born to a single mom. My dad was in prison. And I wasn't ever around anybody that was a millionaire. I don't think I ever met anyone growing up that even made six figures. You know, my mom probably made 20 grand a year, I'm not sure. And so what changed my life around and what can change yours is when your eyes get wide and your vision expands for what the potential is. And you know, there's interesting studies that show that people who are born poor or born middle class rarely become wealthy. And the reason is, and there's multiple reasons, some of it's the economy and the government and the system, but some of it is because when you got a narrow vision, when you have a narrow vision, guess what? You never imagine the potential. And when I was broke and had $37, $47, $0, negative dollars. I remember a time when I had like $3,000 in bank overdrafts in 1 year, right? I just never had enough money. What changed my life was being exposed to new people, new potentials, and one of those was about becoming an entrepreneur. And so if you ever thought of starting your own business, part-time or full-time, I want to show you what I think is one of the best business models, the best business plan that you could